Welcome to the Better Workday Podcast with your host, Niamh Moynihan. Whether you're employed by a large company, do contract work, or you're trying to put some structure around your personal business, there are going to be instances where you need to track your time. For many people, though, time tracking is seen as a nuisance that detracts us from doing the work itself. Niamh, why is time tracking important, and how can we make sure that we are doing it effectively?
Hello, and welcome back to the Better Workday Podcast. This week we are talking about time tracking. I love discussing this topic because there is so much to it. There are both pros and cons to time tracking, and when done well, it can really help you create a better workday. But when you're not doing it well, it can cause so much unnecessary stress and admin. So we really want to make sure that if you are doing it, you're doing it right. Now, I want to start by covering off a few different scenarios for time tracking, and then I'll get into what's good, what's bad, how I do it, and some practical tips if you want to get started. First of all, you might already track your time as a job requirement. There are quite a few jobs where you have to track time spent against, for example, different projects or different clients. And if you're in that job, then you've got very little say about whether or not you log your hours. It's part of your job requirements. But there are still things that you can do yourself to make sure that you can make the most out of the information in that timesheet. It's not just for the team report or the department report or whatever. You can use it to help your working week on a day-to-day basis as well. And we're going to get into that. And then there's a group of people who, like me, track time because they want to. So I track it because I want to. I like the information that it gives me and the decisions it allows me to make. So if you're in that bucket, then this is definitely the episode for you. First things first, what is time tracking? Time tracking is when you break down the hours that you spend at work into different categories. Some people break those into types of project. Others would bucket it by client. Others would look at it by type of work. And you track their time in minutes or in hours, and so that at the end of the week, you know how many hours you worked and where that time went. There's a lot of different ways to track your time. You can use specific software, and I'll put a link to one or two of those in the show notes if you want to check them out. You can use pen and paper, and you can just use a spreadsheet, which is what I use. It doesn't really matter what system you use if you are an individual doing it for yourself, as long as it works for you. And of course, if you're doing it as part of your job, the only thing I would say is don't track your time twice. Just put it straight into the system as opposed to going to save yourself double admin, and use the reports and the functions you can out of that tool as best you can. Time tracking is done on a weekly basis, usually, and I would always encourage people that if they are doing it, to do it real time or near time, which means that you either update your hours as you go along or you at least do it every day, because otherwise it gets really hard to remember what you're doing and when you were doing it. And once you start looking at time tracking, the next question is, what are you going to use that data for? And this is where we get into the pros and cons of time tracking and how to best do it so that it supports your workday and just doesn't cause unnecessary stress. When you track your time, you are recording where your time is going, what activities you are working on, and how much time you're spending on each of them. And this is very, very helpful if, for example, you are delivering a service to different clients and you want to know which of the clients is costing you the most in terms of hours. And if you are an employer, that translates into staffing costs. So it's really, really helpful. But what about when you're tracking it for yourself? Well, that allows you again to see what you're working on and how much time you're spending on each activity. So you can decide if you are focusing on the right things throughout the working day and the working week. Are you spending your time on the things that are most valuable, on the work that's going to help you achieve your goals, whatever they might be for the quarter or for the year? Now, when it's done well and when the information is shared in the right way with the right people, time tracking allows us to tweak and adjust how we spend our time week to week so that we're always moving closer towards our goal. For example, I don't work a linear week. I don't work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I haven't done for a long time. So I work a little bit in the morning, a little bit during the middle of the day, and sometimes I work in the evenings, sometimes I work on the weekends. And this all allows me to work around my family and my husband and all those kind of things, which is great. But if I'm not careful, I could end up working a ridiculous amount of hours. Or on the other hand, I could end up not working enough in order to do what's needed to be done for my business. So by tracking my time, I'm able to see week after week how much I am working and where that time is going so that I can be mindful about what I'm focusing on so that I can pare back my hours if I need to, or indeed so that I can make sure I get more time in the business if I need to. So it really helps me to manage me and to manage my expectations about myself and of other people. What do I need from other people? So when you look at time tracking for yourself and maybe as a team, when it's used to make decisions like that, to know how much people are working, what the time is being spent on, do we need to spend more time in one area, less time in another area, it helps you make more informed decisions because now you're not kind of going on a gut feeling like, I feel I'm spending all my time doing X. You can say, I know I spent 6 hours last week doing X. And then the question becomes, is X a valuable activity? And this is where the discussion around your time really, really makes a difference. If you're tracking this by yourself, for yourself, the discussion is with yourself. So you do have to do some self-reflection or maybe have a chat with an accountability partner or a work buddy to tease it through. But either way you do it, once you have the hours, you have to ask the questions, right? Are you spending your time in the right way? Now, when it's done badly or when it's done wrong, it's really when it's micromanaged and the focus is on trying to find the flaws. What I mean by this, and I'm going to give you a really practical example, is way back about 15 years ago at this stage, I was responsible for implementing a new time tracking software. And it was for people who were on the road. So they were doing field deliveries. So the guys were driving around in vans and they had to do lots of different drop offs during the day. And so on paper, a day might have looked like, 3 deliveries in a certain order, and the route would have taken, we'll say, 8 hours. But in reality, it didn't always work that way. There might have been traffic, construction, roadblocks, delays, parts might have been not ready to be delivered, all these other things. And so the day wouldn't have ended up looking like how I, the organizer, expected it to be. And so the conversation wasn't then about understanding how the day was spent. The questions were all around, why didn't your day go as I planned? And that is a very dangerous place to get into as a manager, or even if you're looking at your own time, because you end up just looking at the flaws and spending all the time analyzing what went wrong instead of looking at how can you make adjustments to improve things tomorrow, next week, next month. So if you do consider starting to track your time, I would be very light on what you expect your output to look like. At the start, I would just track the time and see what happens. And then after a few weeks, you might be able to say, I think the week is going to look a little bit like this. But in the beginning, don't fall into that trap about having your perfect plan and then trying to line up the actual hours with that. It doesn't really serve us. If you're still listening to this episode, it means that you are curious about time tracking and maybe considering doing it yourself. But before we get into the steps to start, there's a few warnings I have to give you. Unless this is a mandatory part of your job, you're probably not going to track your time consistently 52 weeks of the year. I don't. And I love this stuff. And the reason for that is, look, it is an administrative overhead. It is a bit of a mental overhead. And once you know how things are going, there's little value in doing it. And so what I find happens is you'll track your time for maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And then you have a pretty good idea of where things should be and how things should be fitting into your week. And so you'll stop time tracking until something else comes up that makes you feel, I want to take a closer look at how I'm spending my time again. So if you do start doing it, it's not a thing that you have to do for life. I would suggest, and from experience, I know that you do it when you need it. And then you can pull back then when things are kind of running pretty smoothly or when there's no need to be taking that closer look. The other thing is, if you don't have anywhere to put your time, you will either put it in the wrong bucket or you won't log it at all. And this is one of the problems that companies fall into when they try to implement time tracking, because there's always the other bucket. the stuff that doesn't really fit into any of your predefined categories. And it's just such a headache if you are then trying to get all the timesheet reports and you're like, where are the missing hours? Or how come all these hours seem to be in this strange category that doesn't make any sense? It's just one of those things. It's very tricky. And that's because work is complex and you might think you know every element of your job until a new element comes in. If you're tracking your time for yourself, you have the freedom to add an extra row, to add an extra line if you're coming across something, or to have a bucket called miscellaneous. Unless this bucket gets very big, let's say more than a half a day per week, you can leave it like that. And that's just the bits and pieces of work. But otherwise, if you see it kind of creeping beyond those 4 or 5 hours, you'll want to be the following week breaking that down a little bit further and making sure that you are tracking your time as best you can. And then the other side of that is what you do about those lost moments. And what I mean by that is, have you ever got caught scrolling on the internet or lost in your own thought or caught on the mobile and you just don't know where the time has gone? And like, what are you going to do with that? So, again, if you are tracking for yourself, I'd recommend just to leave that off the sheet. If you weren't working, you weren't working. It's fine. It's not, no one's going to knock on your door and demand to see this report. It's for you. And in any given day, let's say if you work a 7.5 or an 8 hour day, you're going to have to deduct time for your lunches. You're going to have to deduct time for your tea and coffee. You're going to have to deduct time for going to the bathroom and all those things. So it's never going to be the full amount of hours on the sheet anyway. And when you don't put that time in, just for the sake of it, what you see is a true picture of the hours that you spent working. For example, if it's around, I don't know, we'll say 6 hours, you might say, yeah, that's pretty good. But if you track the time for a week and you're like, I only got 4 hours logged per day, I don't know where the rest of the time went. Now that is probably going to give you cause for concern. And that's fine, because then the following week, you're going to be more intentional about how you're spending your time. And this is one of the great ways that self-reflection through time tracking can help you change your working habits in a positive way. So don't try and fill the gaps in, leave it as it is, so that when you're reflecting on it, you're reflecting on what is as opposed to what you would like it to look like. And that's so, so important. Now that we've covered all of that, we've covered some good, some bad about time tracking, some things to consider, it is time to talk about how to start tracking your time. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to go to my show notes and my description and download the time tracking template. There are 2 options there. One is the days are listed across the top and the hours of the day are listed down the side, and you literally plug your time in there as the week goes on. The second option is across the top you have the days of the week, and down the side you have blank categories that you can fill in with your own categories of work. And for those, you just put in the amount of hours or minutes you spend on that work every day. I prefer the second one. For a long time, I tried to slot my work into the time slots, and I found it very hard, because what if I only spend 10 minutes on something? Like, I can't put that into an entire half an hour block even. So it started to get a bit frustrating, and to be honest, I'd stop and start it a lot. So I find the second one a lot easier, where I just, as I go through my day, I say, oh, I spent 30 minutes on email, and I just pop 30 into the email category under Tuesday. And then if later on I spend another 30 minutes, I change that to 60 minutes, and I just keep a tally. And I find it easier. And then I find it easier then to add in new categories and stuff like I was mentioning earlier. But download the template and you can choose whichever one works for you, or play with both. And all you do is you start tracking your time as of the moment that you download the template. Only track what you know. Don't try to fill in things that you don't know or time that you missed or anything like that. And at the end of the week, you just take a look back and you ask yourself some questions about that time. So you can ask yourself, did I spend time in the areas that are most aligned to my goals or objectives for this week or this month? Did I spend more time in an area than I expected? Did I neglect an area that I had intended to focus on this week? And are there any changes I want to try and make next week? And how can I make those changes? And if you do that for even 4 weeks, you will be amazed by the sense of control you have over your working week, even when it's busy. the sense of awareness you have about where your time is going and what you're working on, and the confidence that you're working on the right stuff. Now, maybe time tracking isn't for you. Maybe you've just been listening to this episode out of curiosity and it doesn't really float your boat. So what's going to happen if you don't track your time? Nothing. Nothing. This is completely optional. I'm not saying it's a must do in your life by any means, but I do think it's very helpful when times are busy, or if you're unsure if you're working on the right stuff, or maybe if you're working a lot of additional hours and you want to see if you can make some changes there. So if you're at a point in your life where you're saying, Niamh, that all sounds great, but it's not for me at the moment, absolutely fine. What I want you to do is download that template anyway. So if you're ever in a season where you do need to get that transparency over your working week, the template's already there and you can just try it out and see how you get on. I hope you found this episode helpful. As always, please share it with a friend or a colleague who you think would benefit. And until next time, stay well and have a better workday.
Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. The Better Workday podcast is about helping you have a better workday. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. You can find our social media details as well as any references from this episode in the show notes.